What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Pick Six Podcast, CBS Sports Daily NFL Podcast. I'm Will Brinson. I'm your host. It is Wednesday, June 16th. On this episode, we're going to cover some more minicamp news. Did the same thing yesterday, but there's lots of stuff happening. So we'll be talking about various players, like things that are going on around the league, holdouts, maybe a young quarterback struggling, and what it means for that team's AFC playoff hopes. If you're watching on YouTube, do us a favor, smash the like button. I know it seems weird that matters a lot, but it does. Like a bunch of likes help us. So do that, please. And while you're doing stuff, maybe you like sports. Saturday on CBS, an afternoon of sports begins at 1 Eastern, and it is jam-packed, starting with the Bill Pickett Invitational Rodeo Showdown, followed by WNBA Summer Hoops at 4 p.m. Eastern. Head to the field for the NWSL, and then in prime time at 8 Eastern, the green flag is out for Superstar Saturday night as race number 2 of the Camping World SRX Series kicks off on the dirt track at Knoxville Fairgrounds in Iowa. A jam-packed Saturday of sports Saturday on CBS. Joining me now to talk minicamp and I'm sure a fan of all things rodeo, Cody Benjamin. What's up, buddy? Hey.
I'm doing good. I thought we were going to maybe spend a few minutes doing the rodeo. How much do you know about the rodeo?
Well, I mean, I live in the South, so I mean, I'm pretty familiar with.
Okay, so you've been to some?
I don't know if I've been to a rodeo. Surely I have. I've been to a cattle auction.
Did you end up winning anything?
Yeah, won like $500. I sold my cow.
All right,
I'm dead serious. We sold my dad.
You're really serious?
I'm dead serious. Yeah, we raised cows as kids, and my dad was like, well, what do you do when the cow gets older? He's like, well, you sell it for beef, and I was like, oh no, it's awful. He's like, but you get to keep the money. I was like, oh, sounds great.
Oh man, do you remember the cow's name or anything?
Of course, I remember the cow's name. We only named the first one. Because after that, it was like, maybe we shouldn't name these things since we're selling them for, to be chopped up into a hamburger. But the first one, I was a big Duke fan growing up, and the first one was named Billy McCaffrey because he was
that's nice.
Duke, and you get it with the calf. So so Billy,
good old Billy.
Yeah, Billy. I used to have to walk up the hill every morning with a giant baby bottle full of formula milk and feed it to Billy McCaffrey every morning before school. Real charmed life. Pete Prisco.
Oh my gosh. I can't believe it. Yeah, I feel like I know so much more about you, like just from these 30 seconds.
Right?
Wow.
Yeah. People are always surprised to hear that.
He's just like a homegrown American boy.
That's right. Blue collar, salt of the earth man. Then I would go jump in the swimming pool we had on our farm. So
sweet.
Yeah. We do have a pool there, but it's a very small pool. But pond too. Pond's probably better for. That's Caddyshack joke. Anyway, moving on. Tua Tagovailoa. Oh, boy. So, Cody, we don't want to read too much into, things that happen in off-season activities. You can't decide how a season is going to go based on how somebody performs in a mini camp. But, man, was Tua bad. He threw 4 interceptions. Actually, it was technically 5. Got up to 5 according to Adam Beasley, our pal, friend of the show, who said that he eventually threw 5. He basically, ran through them. He's like, another pick and another pick and another pick. It was raining a lot, and Beasley did later on talk to Tua, and we noted one that Tua settled down and it looked a little bit better. It had some solid intermediate throws. And then after the practice said that the emphasis was throwing the ball downfield and into tight windows, which was the explanation for the picks. Jacoby Brissett also had a pair. How concerning is it for you that Tua threw 5 picks at his first day at Dolphins minicamp this offseason?
I mean, first of all, yeah, you got to include the context of the weather. I mean, I think some guys were describing it as a monsoon. I mean, to me, that doesn't sound like a light rain. And also, yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's one thing to be concerned about Tua Tagovailoa's development, whether he's the guy for Miami. And it's another thing to say that, one practice at minicamp. I mean, us talking about it, this is what we're supposed to be talking about right now. I mean, you go out and you perform and we're not talking about it. But I struggled to take one session of throws at a practice in June and say that, just the same way that you're not going to take the sample size of Tua's rookie season and say he's not a good quarterback. I mean, I personally, I fall in the camp where I'm not necessarily sold on Tua, but I'm not, this doesn't really sway my opinion one way or another. I mean, I'm really not moved by it at all. And so I actually, in preparation for this conversation, I looked up quarterback minicamp struggles in several different seasons just to see like who have we been talking about before about this. So
tell.
well, yeah, this is very like anecdotal stuff here. This isn't it's not like evidence as to, but whatever. So one of them, 2017, was Carson Wentz. He looked very shaky. He looked very shaky in minicamp, and I think he turned it on a little bit in training camp. But if you remember, that was his best season. Jimmy Garoppolo in 2018. That was the season where he ended up, I think, blowing out his knee. But 2 years later, he's in the Super Bowl with the 49ers. You've got some Josh Rosens thrown in there where that never really worked out. So I think there's a mixed bag. I remember going to Vikings training camp once, watching Kirk Cousins go like 1 for 10 in the red zone, throwing multiple picks, and he's done nothing but good things for Minnesota, at least statistically. I just think, is it concerning? Yeah, you don't want to be throwing 5 picks, but does it make or break, move the needle in any way? I don't think, unless he stacks days on top of days like this.
I also want to say, I could be wrong here, but I want to say that Aaron Rodgers was maybe not that good in Packers minicamp when he was replacing Brett Favre, and that worked out fine too. I could be wrong. I know there was certainly controversy about Rodgers and whether or not, and of course Jordan Love now struggling as well. I agree with you. I think it is probably overblown from the perspective of, does this actually tell us anything about Tua? And
no, I mean, right. How can it? I mean, we're like, why do we have to talk about it again? This is our jobs. Like, we're supposed to. It'd be another thing if he went 10 for 10 and we're talking about, wow, he looks really sharp. But like, they're in shorts. They're like, it's June. I mean, if it's September and it's October and they're going up against the Patriots and it's the fourth quarter, like, we can evaluate what he does then. This is a different kind of conversation.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, look, like, don't get me wrong. I mean, I do think that, there is something to take away from it. I mean, the coaching staff is doing this for a reason. They want to see whether or not Tua is, how he can perform in these circumstances, and that matters. I mean, not playing well in minicamp is a problem. Throwing picks on 7-on-7s is not good. You don't want to be throwing picks. You want to be doing your job better. But if the emphasis is on throwing downfield and throwing into tight windows, and it's pouring down rain, and it's the first day of minicamp, and you're going up against a pretty good defense, I'm not going to freak out about it too much. Now, if he continues to do this over and over and over and over again, and he struggles and he can't get it together, and he keeps throwing interceptions on 7-on-7s, and then it's going to become a theme. But I would anticipate that it is the number. If it's like 2 interceptions, it's not a big deal. The 5 is probably what really stood out to people, I think. But certainly, and here's the other thing too. When you have a guy like a Tua, see, people are out on Tua. Everybody's out on Tua. That's the thing. So people have already made up their minds. So a lot of times these training camp and these mini camp and these off-season OTA performances sort of serve as confirmation bias for us. If if a young player that we believe is going to have a breakout season is playing really well, then we're going to be like, oh, well, I told you, this guy's coming. It's all coming together for him. And if a guy that everybody's sort of out on it that wants to believe is not going to have a good season or not have a good second season, isn't playing well, then people are going to be like, oh, there it is. Tua sucks, like we said. And it doesn't help. Again, we've talked about this a lot throughout the last year, but it doesn't help that Justin Herbert has had an incredible rookie season. That puts a lot more pressure on Tua, and Joe Burrow played well also. So I think it's certainly, it's going to be overblown. It's somewhere in the middle in terms of how much we should take away from this.
Yeah, how much do you want to bet last year if there was a full offseason program and Justin Herbert threw 2 or 3 picks in practice? I mean, the Wolves would be out. I mean, because no one thought he should have been drafted that high, whatever. And so, yeah, I mean, if Justin Herbert comes out this offseason and throws 4 picks, maybe there's a few tweets about it, but like, no one cares that much because he already proved himself on the field. Exactly. Tua still has to do that. And, he did in some ways, but again, the question's still out there. That's why it's a conversation.
Absolutely. And of course, maybe he would have thrown 6 picks if Xavien Howard had been there. Xavien Howard was not there. He is absent from OTAs for the Dolphins. Brian Flores head coach, of course, said X is a little bit of a unique situation. He was extended, and now we're talking about a potential renegotiation after 1 year. Those turn into longer conversations. We understand that. We've obviously had a lot of talks and conversations about that, and we'll continue to have those and keep them internal, but it's a very unique situation. And Flores added, after 1 year, it's honestly something that hasn't been done before. Not saying we're drawing a line in the sand, but different players set the market every year. I was thinking when I saw the Xavien Howard news pop up on my timeline on Twitter that, I was like, didn't they just sign him to a big contract because he wants more money? You can't do that, Cody. If you signed the contract last year, you can't. That is right. They didn't sign. I mean, Flores just said it. I just read it. It just doesn't feel possible that a Pro Bowl caliber quarterback who, yes, as we can see, signed that contract would come in and complain about his salary. You just signed the contract, bro.
Yeah, I think, our Joel Corey, who contributes, and, Mo, I mean, he's got a background in being an agent, doing the contract stuff.
Former NFL agent, knows the contract very well. Yeah.
Yeah, and he pointed out, the Danielle Hunter situation in Minnesota. There was a lot of talk this offseason about, is Danielle Hunter going to request a trade? He wants a new deal. He feels he's undervalued. And Joel Corey's point was, look, man, like you signed that deal. There are some players that have a legitimate gripe, but when you signed it, you should have been able to foretell that you were going to be underpaid at some point. And so, yeah, in Xavien Howard's case, I think it's a similar thing. The thing with, they're paying both Byron Jones and Xavien Howard to be number one corners. That's where he's, I guess, the beef is. He thinks he's undervalued. He had 10 picks. Byron Jones is not, and he has never been a 10 pick kind of a guy. But yeah, Miami, they're in a tough spot here because you can't necessarily renegotiate that. That's a team friendly deal at this point. And so the interesting thing though is in that Miami Herald report about this, they said that Xavien Howard's agent had already talked to the Dolphins as far back as last October about his client being okay with a trade. He wasn't outright requesting one, but he was okay with it. And so you're talking about going into this season. I don't know that Xavien Howard is that committed to Miami. He just wants to be paid wherever he's at. Yeah.
And so a couple of things on this. You mentioned Byron Jones. Byron Jones makes more money per year. When you look at the cornerback contract, the list of cornerback contracts, he makes more per year than Xavien Howard does. And, he signed. So it's interesting. He actually signed the contract in May of 2019. I knew it was a little bit longer, but as you can see from the thing that Debo has up on the screen, which is if you're watching youtube.com/pick6, you can see all the fancy graphics that Debo weaves into this program, or screenshots, whatever you want to call them. The 2019 season was his final year of his rookie deal. And so 2020 is when his extension kicked in. That's a bit of a tricky situation too, because if you're Byron Jones, if you're Xavien Howard, you like signing in May of 2019 because you've just gotten yourself a ton of money. And you've locked yourself into a contract that starts a year afterwards. But the problem is now, which is what Brian Flores points out, now there are guys who are changing the market and changing how much cornerbacks are worth. And Xavien Howard arguably the best cornerback in football, or one of the best cornerbacks in football. He's making $15 million. Jalen Ramsey makes $20 million a year. Marlon Humphrey, $19.5. Tre'Davious White, $17.25. Darius Slay is up there at 16.6, and then Byron Jones at 16.5. I would guess that Xavien Howard believes he should be paid like a top 3 cornerback at minimum, and that's why he wants to renegotiate. But I'm with Brian Flores here. I mean, you could try, it's a unique situation. Sure, you want to get in that money, but you get in that money, then Byron Jones wants to get paid more. I mean, the reality is Byron Jones became a free agent and signed with the Dolphins, and that's why he's making more than Xavien Howard, who signed when he still had a year left on his rookie deal and wanted to get paid before something bad happened to either his performance or his physical body. And so you just signed the deal. This isn't a Stephon Gilmore situation where he's now played out a 5-year deal and he's coming up on free agency, and he is very much below market. I mean, I look at that and I see, if you look at the top cornerback salaries, what I see is Byron Jones is overpaid, but Xavien Howard is probably right where he should be. I mean, you could argue that he deserves to be top 3 or 4. But look, you just, like you said, that's part of the negotiation process. I mean,
we're not talking about 4 years ago signing an extension and now you're about to hit the market and you're severely underpaid. We're talking about you're 1 year into the extension that your agent negotiated for you. And again, I mean, we go back and forth with contract stuff all the time, trying to see both sides. I mean, because most of the time the teams get the benefit of the doubt when the players probably deserve more. In this case, this is one of those scenarios where your representation needs to see the value of a cornerback on the open market 2 years from now, which, I mean, a lot can change in 2 years, but you've got to be able to see that market, and they did.
Yeah, and look, it's funny as you say that though, because they're seeing it now. Like now is what you're seeing it, because what you see is a guy like James Bradbury, who's a very good player, but who's probably not as good as Xavien Howard, and he's at 14.5. Trey Wayne's 14 million. I see William Jackson on here at 13.5 million. Shaquille Griffin 13.33. Adoree Jackson 13 million. All those players are in between Xavien Howard and Stephon Gilmore in terms of how much money they make, and the common thread with all those guys, they all became free agents, because when you become a free agent, you are able to go out there and get more money. William Jackson too, 13.5 with Washington. Whether or not you think, or whatever you think about, those players, they became free agents, and that's how they were able to get more money. If Xavien Howard had waited and played out his deal, they would have tagged him, I'm sure, but he would have gotten to the market and he would have probably gotten a monster contract where he gets 17.5 or 18 or $19 million a year. On the other hand, Xavien Howard, you signed that deal in pretty good time because you missed the whole pandemic short squeeze on the salary cap, and teams claiming they didn't have any money. So I don't know, man. Maybe this is a pretty good deal. I don't like this idea of coming back and looking for more money when you're a top 6 paid cornerback, and just basically because your teammate is getting more than you. I think it's a bad look by Xavien Howard. But if they're not going to find him and he can be away from minicamp, that's fine. I would say that not a great set of news items for the Miami Dolphins if you're if you're expecting a big season from them. Let's take a quick break and we'll tell you about another superstar player in the secondary who is not showing up for his team's minicamp. Jamal Adams traded for a pile of picks, and he is not showing up at Seahawks camp until he gets a contract. His absence is excused, according to Brady Henderson. Jeremy Fowler, our old pal Jeremy Fowler, reports that Adams, the Seahawks are aware of that there might be some family personal issues going on. So while Adams is not going to participate in the minicamp, it's excused. And I think both sides seem to understand that they're going to get there on the contract. It's just a matter of when, not if.
Yeah, I think that there's been some speculation. I mean, I don't want to speculate, I guess, about the personal issue, but there's been some reports that it could be tied to the contract as well, because Seattle knows this negotiation is ongoing. They're not trying to fine him and rile up the negotiations in that way. Yeah, I think the expectation was probably that it would have been done by now. We talked about with the Laramie Tunsil deal, there's other kind of precedents for Trent Williams. When you make these trades and you give up so many picks, you're almost committing also to give them that big deal. And so the issue with Jamal Adams, and again, going back to Joel Corey here, he just wrote a big story about this, but
sure. No, Joel's good analyst.
Yeah, he's on the contract stuff. And, Jamal Adams, there's talk that he wants to kind of, I think the terminology was blow the safety market out of the water. And I mean, that makes sense because he was looking to become one of the NFL's highest paid players leaving the Jets. And so you look at the safety market, Justin Simmons is on top of that with about, I think, just over 15 million per year. That's not close to the top highest paid defensive players. I mean, you've got guys over 20 million. You've got Joey Bosa above 25 million. I think that, his best case scenario, and I don't know if this would be possible, but would be classifying himself as a linebacker. And he's used as a blitzer, as kind of a chess piece on Seattle's defense. But I guess the question is really, like, from Seattle's perspective, is it worth? I mean, it almost has to be worth it because you gave up those picks. I mean, I did a double take looking at the compensation for that trade. I forgot. Like, I can't believe I didn't.
How much they gave up for Jamal Adams?
Yeah, I mean, in today's NFL, it's just it's absurd. I guess 2 first-round picks, and what was it? 2 firsts and a
2 firsts and seconds, right? Or 2 firsts and maybe 2 firsts and a second. The problem here for Jamal Adams is, as you point out correctly, the safety market. Justin Simmons at 15.25. We got this up on the screen again. Come watch on youtube.com/pick6 and hit the subscribe button. You'll get notified when we go live. And the episodes are actually up earlier than normal than the audio version because of technical things and stuff. But when you look at the safety market, the only guy above 15 million is Justin Simmons, and he had to get multiple franchise tags and play great to get that. Buda Baker at 14.75, Eddie Jackson 14.6, Kevin Byard, and a little fella named
Tyron Mathieu
at $14 million each, along with Landon Collins. And there's a huge drop off there at the safety market, but that's the top end safeties are getting 14 million, 15 million a year. Jamal Adams, according, I saw a report, he wants to be paid like an edge rusher. Well, that ain't happening. Because you look at the edge rushers, and Debo, if you could do that little drop down and click on edge rusher there, and we'll look at this. The edge rushers, no, that means you're going to be the top safety is paid like Carl Lawson or Trey Hendrickson, basically. In other words, you're paid like a top 15 or 20 edge rusher. And by the way, those guys just hit free agency. So, I mean, Danielle Hunter, like, does he think he's going to get more than Danielle Hunter? Because that'd be tough. Maybe he will, but he's not getting $20 million to be
nuts.
It's just they can't do that. Granted, he led the team in sacks, with 9.5 last year, and so you can make the case that that's how he's used. But if he was planning on getting, I mean, this is why the Jets were willing to trade him. I would guess is that they had extensive talks with his representation. We're under the impression that Jamal Adams wants to be paid like a different position than the one that he plays, believes that he should be a $20 million guy. And if that's the case, this is going to be a difficult negotiation to pull off because, there's only 5 edge rushers, Frank Clark, DeMarcus Lawrence, Khalil Mack, Myles Garrett, and Joey Bosa, who make more than $20 million a year. I can't see a path to this. And even getting him in the 15 to 20 range is difficult just because of, it's like, look, dude, look what we gave up to get you. And, conversely, he's like, look what you gave up to get me. It's pretty clear that you value me. And if you just rent me for 2 years and let me walk, it's going to be a problem.
I mean, I think it raises more than anything, it raises an interesting philosophical question about like the idea of positionless football. And I know that that's been thrown around and sometimes it gets like you have an eye roll that accompanies it because I mean, there are positions but I mean, the value in terms of the trade compensation and then the contract that's going to come. I mean, can you consider that Jamal Adams, I mean, in your mind, I mean, can you trade for a guy like Jamal Adams and then pay a guy like Jamal Adams because you don't view him as a safety, but you just view him as a defensive talent? I mean, can he be, it's so tough to do that because we're in the mold of just thinking of these guys as, I mean, we know he's not the greatest cover guy. We know he's more of a box safety, like a linebacker safety hybrid who can rush the passer, but is the philosophical those hurdles is that, I mean, can we clear those to justify paying a guy 18, 20 plus $1 million a year? I don't know.
I mean, I couldn't. So,
why is that? Because of Jamal Adams as a prospect himself, or
no, and I really like Jamal Adams. Actually, a friend of the podcast, Jamal Adams. He came on at the Super Bowl. He's a great dude, and very, very open, honest about what he wants. And he said, he was very clear about his situation with the Jets. I think he's a great player. I just don't know that he's a guy that puts your team over the top in a way that some of those defensive guys that we were talking about do. Just because you are lining up at safety, and yes, he can rush the passer and he can do all kinds of different things. Very, very unique player, very awesome player. But I just don't know that I'm getting to $20 million if I'm the Seahawks. And I don't know that he's going to be willing to take less than $20 million. I think ultimately he's probably going to, if he wants to get that deal in Seattle, he's probably got to settle for something like 16 million. I mean, they'll make him the highest paid safety. I don't have a problem with that. I just don't know that I can give him to 20, 25 million. That's just too much for me.
No, yeah. I think that's where the middle ground has to be, if it's going to be in Seattle, is right above Justin Simmons, and he gets to say I'm the highest paid safety, but he's not going to be in that upper echelon. And one final Joe Corey pool for you. I know he said that Seattle doesn't traditionally negotiate with guys unless they show up. And so you remember Cam Chancellor holding out. There's some other guys. And so, yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see if he shows up for training camp.
Yeah, that's sort of a Pete Carroll philosophical thing, I think, where it's like, look, you want us to negotiate in good faith, you have to be here practicing in good faith. And that's tough too, because you don't want to go, you don't want to show up and get hurt and, and all of that. But this may explain too why, and we don't want to suggest that, but they gave 2 firsts and a third. And they sent a player back. I can't remember who it was, but
Bradley McDougal.
There you go. Bradley McDougal. This, it's possible. I don't want to suggest that he's not being forthright about his excused absence, because he is excused. That's what they said. But if it is contract related, you wouldn't want to just hold out and be an unexcused absence, because then Seattle might not negotiate with you. Finally, in terms of training camp news, we have the Chicago Bears, an update that will please John Breach, no doubt. Chicago Bears. This is a good catch from Daniel Greenberg at Chicago Sports Updates. He was listening to the Chris Collinsworth podcast featuring Richard Sherman. Reminder, that podcast, less popular than our podcast in Australia, for those that were wondering. And Matt Nagy was on with Chris Collinsworth and said that there is no possible scenario where Justin Fields is the starting quarterback for the Chicago Bears in week 1. Nagy: Andy Dalton is our starter. Justin is our number 2, and we are going to stick with this plan. You just got to trust the plan. Buy or sell, Cody, that there is no possible scenario where Justin Fields starts week 1.
I'm interested that you posed it that way, because I thought we were just going to rip into the Bears. Let me just compare this first to another team. What's that?
You can rip into the Bears if you want.
Well, let's start by just comparing this to another team that spent a high pick on a quarterback this offseason. The San Francisco 49ers drafted Trey Lance, who I think was widely considered maybe more of a raw prospect than Justin Fields. Their incumbent starter, Jimmy Garoppolo, has a Super Bowl appearance under his belt. He's performed pretty well under Kyle Shanahan. I think we can both agree that Jimmy Garoppolo's ceiling, or at least his production as a high-level quarterback, has been. I mean, you would agree with me, right? That he's higher than Andy Dalton on the totem pole.
Yeah.
Okay.
For sure, way higher. Andy
Dalton's
never even won a playoff game.
Now you've got 2 years removed from a Super Bowl with Jimmy Garoppolo as your quarterback. You've got the Niners saying, Trey Lance, you can come and take Jimmy's job.
Yep.
If you're good enough this summer, you can take this guy who took us to the Super Bowl. You can take his job, and you can start week 1 as a 21-year-old rookie. On the other hand, we've got the Chicago Bears, who decided to sign Andy Dalton, decided to tweet out the QB1 picture with Andy Dalton, decided to call Andy Dalton and assure him over and over again he's the starter. And now you've got Justin Fields. We haven't even set foot in training camp, and these guys are insisting that there's no scenario where Justin Fields starts. Now, I think there's 2 reasons for that. One reason could be the Bears want to keep doubling down on this decision to sign Andy Dalton and look like they really were committed to him. The other option is Justin Fields just isn't as good as we thought he was, and some teams were right for passing on him. You tell me, based off the Bears' history, this current regime, which option you think that is. I mean, I think it's pretty clear they're just doubling down, and that's what it is.
So I'm trying to find it. It's impossible to find, because now the news is too difficult, because the Andy Dalton stuff has taken it over. But they basically did this exact same thing with Mike Glennon and Mitchell Trubisky.
And wasted 4 weeks.
Yes, and look, Mike Glennon is my boy. I mean, but I'm fine. Well, first of all, it's different because Mike got a big contract from the Bears, and they were acting like he was their guy for the long haul, and then they went and drafted Trubisky. The thing is that if you shouldn't not start the rookie just because he's a rookie and you want to give him time to learn. If you have a plan, if you believe philosophically that is how these guys are supposed to sort of work their way into the season, then that's okay, because I do think Kyle Shanahan has some of that too. But if you
we're not even in training camp yet. We haven't even seen the guy compete. Right.
Exactly. Look, first of all, there is a scenario where Justin Fields starts week 1. Andy Dalton breaks his leg. Justin Fields is starting week 1. I mean, I guess Nick Foles could still start, but the point being is that there is absolutely a scenario, and there are probably multiple scenarios. It's not like the friggin' Avengers Endgame where there's one path to save the world. There's a billion different things that can happen where Justin Fields starts week 1 for the Chicago Bears. It's not that big of a stretch, and it's idiotic to shoehorn yourself into this setup where you're telling everyone, oh, we can't start Justin Fields. Can't start Justin Fields. Yes, you can. If Andy Dalton sucks and Justin Fields looks like he's going to be a good quarterback from Jump Street, you start Justin Fields. I think that they like the idea of having Justin Fields as a parachute parachute in the midseason, where not to save the Bears season, but in order to, like, if the Bears stink and the team's not very good and they're not winning games, you pull the ripcord and Justin Fields is suddenly in there, and you go to your bosses and say, hey, look, like, remember we drafted this guy, so we gotta see what we got in him, and we're coming along nicely. I think that's what they're doing, which is basically like laying up. That it is soft, it is scared.
We talked before. I mean, I've been on here before with you and talked about the difference between when they did sign Andy Dalton, how it was almost like they're trying to bunt instead of swing for a home run, which they needed to do. They took the home run with Justin Fields, but now it's almost like you're saying, they're using it as a safe play. It's almost like, tell me if I'm exaggerating here, but I feel like the longer the offseason goes on, the more I'm like questioning the Justin Fields pick, just because it was the Bears that did it and because of the way they've operated. I mean, and that's nothing against, like, I'm sure, I hope for Justin Fields' sake or Andy Dalton's sake that these guys go out and perform. But like, it's just like the way this whole operation has gone is just, well, like, why are they making it so hard on themselves? It just seems it's baffling a little bit.
By the way, July 26, 2017, Ryan Pace calling Mike Glennon is our starting quarterback. It is a weird thing to do in the offseason. That's the start of training camp, so I guess a little bit different, but we're a month away basically. So it's just a weird thing to do to box yourself into a corner like that with a stance on your quarterbacks without having actually seen them participate. Yeah,
and it's like you said, it's one thing to like believe that Justin Fields would be better off by sitting and learning for a little bit. It's another thing to say over and over, because this isn't the first time we've heard the Bears come out publicly and remind everyone that, like, Andy Dalton, it was as if they signed this guy to a 4-year, $90 million contract. But the way they've talked about it repeatedly, and it's like they won't even leave the crack open like the 49ers will do for Trey Lance, which is just, maybe that'll change in training camp if somebody like in the Bears staff says, wait a second, this guy looks like he might be a good quarterback. Maybe he could help us win. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. Anyway, it's just idiotic. It's stupid. They did the same thing before, and they're doing the same thing now, and it drives me nuts. And the Bears going to Bears. The quickly other things of note: the Vikings added Sheldon Richardson. He signed a 1-year deal, I believe, and he was asked. He's like got kind of mad. I think he was asked if it was a prove it deal. He's like, I don't need to prove anything. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, sorry, buddy. He's like, I proved it last year. I proved it before. I proved it all over this league. It's like, oh, whoa, just settle down.
I like the move. I like the move though.
Yeah, it's a good move. Good move for the Vikings. I'm starting to come around to the Vikings, bouncing back this season and looking pretty good. Mekhi Becton not practicing with the Jets due to a foot injury. That is a big, big deal if he is for some reason not healthy to start the season. Long way off, of course, but certainly smart to not have him out there practicing. He is a key piece to their offense and a key piece of Zach Wilson's development. And the Chiefs also plan to use Chris Jones as an edge rusher to shake things up. Do you find that funny that they would do that after they signed him to a contract?
I think they're doing it because they have no one else to rush the passer. So there's your answer to that.
I think that is correct. All right, that is the show. Cody, thanks as always, buddy. We will talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me on, Will.